So we're going to be planting a multi-graft pear tree today. I'm really excited about this tree. It's actually a quite expensive tree because I think it takes a while to establish this. It's already 2 years old. It'll probably fruit in a couple more years because it's a bit older of a tree. But I got really excited because it's a multi-graft, and what that means is that there's different varieties of pears grafted onto the same tree. And actually one of our friends, Sean, grafted I believe it was an apple tree. It could have been a pear tree, but I believe he had different kinds of apples. And we also went to Logie's, which is in Connecticut, a very famous greenhouse, and he had multi-grafted a bunch of different types of citrus onto a tree.
Fortunella margarita, Nagami, which is the oval kumquat, and the vast majority of this tree is still that. But back, probably 20, 30 years ago, I did some grafting onto it to put stock plants, also for the fun of it, and to put multiple plants on this tree, or the understock that we have here. And so we have 3 types of kumquats. We have 2 lime quats. We have Citrus mitis variegated on it, which is a sour kumquat hybrid. And we also have the Palestine sweet lime, which is an interesting lime in that it has sweetness to it rather than being sour.
It's just really cool because if it does grow out, you'll have different types of pears, and they may not fruit, it's kind of more mid-season pear, so you probably could actually get some pears at the same time, but different pears. So this is a 4-in-1 pear, and they have the Harrow Delight pear, and then a Warren pear, which is more like a dessert pear, and then a Kiefer pear, and then a Blake's Pride pear. Now, typically we would put this in the orchard, but we totally filled the orchard, and we've been preparing this area known as like the interstitial area. So it's the interstitial between the forest and the meadow or the orchard, depending on where you land. And you'll see that this area it looks like it had been cleared out, but what actually happened is that we cut down all the dead or diseased or dying or deformed trees, and we actually piled them up here, and we recently just chipped them.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands, strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law, hope they won't shoot me down soon. Catch me howling at the moon. When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
We piled them here, and it actually packed down all the Solidago canadensis, which is the Canada goldenrod that you see actually behind here, and all the grasses, and it actually makes this land a lot more workable. Now, this is not a bare root tree, so I'm going to plant it a little differently. We do have some bare roots. I actually brought some here. These had been sitting in water. Sometimes it's easier to plant, and sometimes it's better to plant a bare root because it could be more accustomed to your soil. Some would argue that it could actually grow faster, but this plant did not come as a bare root. So we're going to work with the soil that it has and try to, take this nice soil that it's been growing in and mix it in as much as we can with our soil, and you can see the difference here. We have a very thick clay soil. You can see this kind of gray, blue, ferrous color of our soil, but it's actually not that bad. And it didn't take too long to actually dig this hole. And Sander, you actually helped me do this particular hole, but for this whole interstitial, we planted about 50 shrubs and 50 trees. And it really was a 2 to 3 person job. I mean, your dad came in and he was you were using this, which is basically a little post hole digger. So we break up the hole this way, and then somebody comes in and then actually uses the shovel to dig that all out. But this is an excellent tool to use, especially for scuffing up the sides, because oftentimes when you have a clay soil, and I know many people do have clay soil, it could form basically like a ceramic pot, and it's hard for the roots to break out of that. So you want to be able to scuff up the sides of the soil, but I was not displeased with the soil. Actually, it's nice and crumbly. You can see it has some stones in it, but nothing that's too bad. And then as we kept on digging, you know, you'll see even this worm right here, the worms actually go deep here. So there's definitely some decent aeration within the soil, even though it's heavy clay. So I'm gonna take this bamboo stick out. They usually put that bamboo stick in for shipping. One of the things that we're actually dealing with right now, you can see it right here, spongy moth, also known as the gypsy moth. So they are defoliating some trees. They don't really love pear, but they will eat it if they have to. So these have been disastrous for some of our trees. So we're hoping that the trees will actually bounce back. I mean, we could delay planting for another, they're probably going to be bad next year too. We could potentially delay planting for another year or two, but I'd rather not, because these trees are going to see more pressures like that, and I'd rather give them the opportunity to see those pressures and, you know, rise to the occasion and actually, you know, survive. And I think putting in fruit trees sooner rather than later for us is important, because it takes a while for fruit trees to bear fruit. Okay, so I'm gonna work this out. The soil is really nice. I'm gonna kind of push it a little bit more towards here so the soil falls a bit closer in, and we're gonna take a look at these roots. It says an OHXF333 rootstock. You wanna make sure that the rootstock is good for your area, and this 4-in-1 graft is actually good for zones 5 through 9, if I'm not mistaken, and we're in zones 5 with a border of zone 6. It's European and Asian pear rootstock, and they're dwarfed. So this will be a dwarf variety, but then on the rootstock, they also have 4 other grafts. Wow. And these are probably, I would guess, bud grafts. So they grafted this into the bud of this rootstock. And I should say that this is south facing. So this tree is going to get quite a bit of light. It needs at least, I would say, 6 hours a day in order for it to produce fruits. And pears can relatively, depending on the variety, be relatively disease resistant. Okay, see how this kind of sticks together, the clay? It's obviously not as easy as this. So in a way, you know, you don't really want to amend the soil that's going into the hole. You'd want to put maybe your compost or your mulch on top. But in this case, I'm not going to let the soil go to waste, but I am going to be putting more of this clay into this hole so that it gets more accustomed to the fact that it's not going to be in a bed of perfectly friable soil. Okay, I'm gonna try to break this clay up as much as possible. And we'll add some of this in here. I mean, for clay soil, this is really not bad. As we get further up this way, it definitely gets harder and harder to work with. And as we get further down that way, the clay is actually a little wetter. Now we're gonna get a rain today, but I am still going to water this in, because you wanna get any of the soil and allow that soil to settle as much as possible. But we're lucky that we've been getting some decent rain, and it is springtime still, so planting in spring or fall is ideal. I actually prefer planting trees in the fall because we often get like really hot summers, and oftentimes it doesn't rain during the summer. We could have some droughts. And with the falls, it typically is wetter, and it allows the plants to establish more easily without stress. But it is the season that it is, and we wanted to get these in the ground, so we're gonna take that chance. And again, try to break up the clay as much as possible. I know it's a real challenge for anybody with clay soils. I know it's very difficult to dig sometimes, but clay is not bad soil. It really holds on to the nutrients, and you just, with over time, using leaf mold or compost or anything along those lines will really help your soil. Now I'm just planting this right into the ground. I have no noticeable like berm or anything along those lines, but you could do that. And that, in fact, like in our orchard area, we actually did a berm. We bermed up and planted the trees up into that berm so that when the water hits the berm, the water could soak up and the trees are more uplifted up from the soil. Here in the interstitial, because we're planting so many trees, we're not doing that. We're just kind of digging them into the ground, and we'll top this with mulch. And I'm gonna put some of this soil on top. Like I said, I didn't augment the entire hole with this soil, but I don't want it to go to waste. Now you can see that they have these little yellow balls in here. This is a slow release fertilizer, but I am going to add some espoma tree tone to this as well, just along the drip line. But you could see that the shape of this tree right now is very columnar, so you don't have to add very much, outside of this. But I'm going to add a little less than I typically would, just because this tree is and has been growing in some slow release fertilizer already. And actually the nutrients here in the soil, we did get them tested, not precisely here, but in the lawn. And the nutrient load within our soil is actually fairly good. But I will add a little bit of this. This is actually a little boost of fertilizer, and it has their biotone in as well. So it really helps with a transplant shock, transplanting certain trees. See what it looks like. I would definitely put on gloves to do this and get a sense of that. Just adding some around the drip line. We're gonna actually water this in. You don't want to augment the hole too much for trees, because it'll have a tendency to want to actually grow only within that hole and never want to push its roots out, which is why I suggested in the beginning that bare root can actually be more effective, because they'll become more accustomed to your soil. This one was growing in that nice friable, loamy substrate, which is not, as you could see, not our soil. So there's definitely some schools of thought about that. And I have to say, there's a lot of right ways to plant a tree. There's also a lot of wrong ways to plant a tree as well. But let's see if this
caterpillar making its way over to the tree. He's like, oh, this is great. Thank you so much.
Let's actually see if he tries to make his way up to the...
It's amazing how fast they can walk.
I know.
Yeah, he's going for it.
He's like, this is it. This is where I'm going.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're witnessing
4 different kinds of pears.
4 different kinds of pears. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get him before.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just compress this in. That little bugger going up that tree. I mean, honestly, they're so plentiful that when we were walking, Sandra and I had them coming up our shoes onto our legs.
I'll be done here in a second, guys.
I'm gonna bring in some of this beautiful hardwood mulch and just put this around the edge. You don't want the mulch to touch the trunk of the tree, because it retains moisture and it could invite some rot. So don't have the mulch directly around the base of the trunk. But this will damp down any weeds that will come in, at least for a little while. It'll protect the soil, because especially with this clay soil, if all of a sudden we have a really sunny day, it will really bake the soil, and then it makes it hard like a rock, and it's very difficult for the water to actually penetrate. So something like this, like a mulch, or you could use pine needles or whatever you use, wood chips as a mulch, then it will actually maintain some of the moisture. And again, we're just going to pour a little water in there. I'll get another bucket. I still can't find my watering can. I don't know where that walks off to. See, a watering can would work better because I just blew all that mulch off the top here. And you don't need a thick layer of mulch, you know, just 1 inch. Sometimes I go a little thicker with the mulch, but 1 to 2 inches would be suffice. So that is our multi-graft pear. And I'm really excited for this to actually produce fruit. I'm really excited for this whole interstitial actually to come together. And I'm sure we're gonna have a few more trees and shrubs that we're gonna plant up here, but this one's not bad. Oh yeah. I almost forgot about this little whippersnapper. Oh, look at him. Unbelievable. All right. Enough of that. Enough of that. Rated R. We're not rated for children.
If you're finding value in the videos we produce, we'd love for you to subscribe and hit the notifications button here on YouTube. We're committing 10% of our Google AdSense revenue back to projects in the Finger Lakes region, which will be matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So by becoming a viewer and supporter, you're also helping the community here.